Thank you very much. It's kind of interesting, actually. Just one thing that's come up in front of me. I've just noticed Precision Ag News is sitting on the front desk, and that was the SPAR group, the Southern Precision Agriculture Association, is another group that I work with in South Australia. This morning before lunch, I'm going to talk to you about pesticide application spray drift management and what the GRDC is actually doing in this space, and also what the National Working Party for Pesticides application is actually doing in there. Now, if you go to your notes, there's actually a paper there that's been prepared by Nicholas Woods from Plant Health Australia on behalf of the Working Party, and that represents the consensus view of a range of stakeholders, which I'll talk about in a moment. Just to talk about some of the external drivers of management of weeds, for example, we could talk about other areas of crop protection as well, but particularly in weeds research, we do have a number of risks that we have, external drivers that actually drive some of the risks to our industry. And although herbicide resistance is probably one that's talked about significantly, pesticide use regulation is actually one that's starting to play into the equation in terms of actually how we manage our farm operations, our farm businesses. Back in October of 2009, there was a meeting of stakeholders in Canberra discuss pesticide stewardship and training, and at that meeting the APVMA tabled their intention to finalise the outcomes of the National Spray Drift Review, and at that meeting they verbalised their intention to hand down initial recommendations early the following year, and that actually happened on the 1st of March last year, and they provided some guidance in terms of what their recommendations are likely to be and seeking industry input in terms of those recommendations, particularly in relation to phenoxy herbicides such as 2,4-D and MCPA. And out of that, it caused a fair bit of consternation amongst the participants of that meeting, and within GRDC we had a lot of discussions about how we might address some of the more immediate impacts. Now, one of the issues that was quite evident to us is that we were actually needing to do some fairly rapid work in this space from an industry perspective to, I suppose, meet some of the data requirements the APVMA had indicated they need to fill some decisions they were looking at making in terms of finalising the spray drift review. So the GRDC last year approved funding initially of $100,000 in total to do two things. One's to develop an interim drift reduction technology model for 2 DRTs, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but particularly the use of air induction and coarse spray technology nozzles. Also, we put some resources in place for further project development and consultation with industry stakeholders to work through the process of what actually needs to be done in this space, because the GRDC is just one of many different stakeholders in this process. In fact, the grains industry is just one of many industries in this space as well. And I'll talk to you about the process we went through there. So we actually got some work underway initially to develop some further drift reduction technology modelling, and we did actually get some support from other pesticide registrants, and that has now been submitted to the APVMA. I'll talk about in a moment. But I'm actually changing hats here slightly, and I'm now actually speaking as a representative of the National Working Party on Pesticide Applications, and this paper and presentation has been prepared by Nicholas Woods of Plant Health Australia. I'll explain his role in a minute. And I'm one of many stakeholders around the table representing GRDC in that process. So just to go back over that background, the APVMA implemented a new policy on the 1st of March, and that caused a fair bit of debate and discussion in the industry and a fair bit of concern at the grower level, I have to say. That's probably fairly justified. They indicated that they were going to provide new product label instructions that describe mandatory no spray zones, or buffer zones as we describe them, in downward direction where you sprayed, and a whole suite of labels. In fact, they've got a hit list of 44 products at the moment that are currently in priority order, including some key products such as glyphosate and paraquat, and some fungicide products as well, but predominantly in the herbicide area, where they're actually doing a comprehensive review of their instructions on those spray labels. Now, the APVMA has since handed down their report on operating principles in relation to spray drift, and you can actually download this from the APVMA website, and if you're interested in this space, I encourage you to have a look at that. But it dictates some of the aspects of droplet size, weather conditions, no spray zones and record keeping requirements they're going to require under these proposed changes. And they are quite significant and include aspects such as requirements in terms of not spraying when inversion zones occur, which presents some other challenges from a meteorological point of view. If you just look back at some of the previous labels, this is an Amistar label that's used in the horde industry as an example that we've just used, but you can see there's fairly basic instructions in previous labels in terms of do not spray when conditions favour drift beyond the area, etc., etc. It's fairly basic in its interpretation and it's open, I suppose, to a broad range of interpretations from that point of view. Just to go forward now to one of the first labels have been impacted, and Bayer unfortunately probably on their Movento label copped this, but they've provided much more detail on products that are going through registration now in terms of no spray zones, and you can see it's a lot more detail in terms of wind speed, and mandatory no spray zones, depending whether it's a ground or air-based application. Now, if we talk about the issues around phenoxy herbicides, indications are they're looking at a spray drift buffer zone of about 300 metres for 2,4-D based on the current data they have to date. That's for ground-based applications, and probably up to 750 metres for aircraft. Now, in the response we've given to the APVMA from GRDC, we've clearly said that we think those buffer zones are probably unworkable, and the industry wants to work together to see whether we can prepare more data to put a better case for a more realistic buffer zone in place. And one of the things the APVMA have done is they've created a drift reduction technology permit system, and if you go to their website you can see the start of this page. There's not a lot of information yet, but they are indicating that they're looking at permit-based systems to essentially give credit to the applicator in terms of the drift reduction technology approaches. And they're yet to sort of populate that in terms of what that actually means, because they're still yet to receive, well, I should say review the data and complete the review of the data that's been submitted to date, and there's certainly from our point of view going to be considerably more data submitted. The permits, I suppose, can be applied to a whole range of situations, but ultimately it's going to be the responsibility of growers and commercial applicators to ensure they're actually adhering within that permit system and according to local requirements. And so it's going to potentially create like a two-step process for industry. And so for agronomists and advisors, that's going to create some other challenges. You're going to have to refer to the label itself and also to the permit system on the APVMA website. But anyway, to try and address this, in March last year, we actually formed a National Working Party in pesticide applications, basically just to provide a forum to assist growers and provide a framework that, as stakeholders from GRC's point of view, grains industry, horticulture, etc., that we could work together to try and work towards an improved approach in this area. And just to give you an indication of who's currently participating in that process, we've in the broad meetings we've had Grains, Cotton, Rural Industries, RDCs, Horticulture, CropLife Australia, pesticide registrants, national state farming organisations and some industry-specific organisations involved in those discussions. And out of that, it was recommended that an interim executive committee would be formed to work together to put a business plan and case together about how to work forward in this space. And so that interim committee, you can see, is chaired by Gavin Katnar, who's an independent chair, who's actually ex-staff, and has a range of participants from a whole range of companies in that space. And I have to say this has been a really effective way of having cross-industry discussions about how to approach these issues. And that executive committee has been chartered with putting a plan together. And I'll speak to that a little later, but we'll just go to the next part, which is scoping really about what we can do. And the GRC did actually provide resources to help in this space and to provide some support to Nicholas Woods of Plant Health Australia to help the Working Party work through some of the more detailed business planning in this respect. And this has really, I think, helped us have improved dialogue, not only across industries, but particularly with the APVMA, which is the main regulator in this space. Just to give you a bit of an idea about where we started from, actually I'll just go back to this photograph here. Back in, it's got its origins back in the Vietnam War era in particular. There's a lot of aerodynamic modelling that the US Air Force developed around spray drift, and as you can sort of see, there's a lot to do with the deployment of pesticides in terms of defoliation technology at that point. But that has since been developed further into a product called AgDisc, which was more highly developed by the US Forestry Service. And the Spray Drift Task Force was formed in the United States, which was a consortium particularly led by CropLife America members and with co-investment from the US EPA to develop a more sophisticated model called AgDrift. And the important thing for us as an industry is that AgDrift model actually had a ground-based model attached to it as well. One of the difficulties of this model, and this is actually what the APVMA have used for their valuation regulations here in Australia, is that it's pretty basic. It doesn't give you, in terms of modelling components, much choice about height, nor in terms of spray qualities. In fact, you can see it doesn't include a coarse spray quality or a very coarse spray quality, which is quite a deficiency when you look at many growers actually using AI or air induction technology nozzles today, so operating in a completely different framework. And so what has actually happened as a consequence of using these models is that it basically, if you don't look at coarse spray qualities, it pushes you out to a very long drift curve for fine spray technologies, and that creates some real challenges in that we really are in the position we had to provide new data for better or current spray qualities that growers are currently using. And so what happened is that Andrew Hewitt from the Centre for Pesticide Application Safety, working with Tom Wolf, that some of you may know from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, basically reanalysed some existing data, did some additional modelling work in wind tunnels and some additional validation of that to look at principally at the use of coarse spray technology, particularly with the use of AI nozzles, and also the use of shrouds. And this is a AgShield spray from Canada, which is really one of the few commercially available shrouds you can buy here in Australia. And from that, we actually developed a series of curves, which actually are now giving us extra coarse spray qualities. And the downwind distances you can sort of see from these curves are starting to get significantly less than 300 metres in terms of their potential risks. So it's been an important process for the industry to actually bring forward some new data and submit that to the APVMA. Now they're currently considering that, so we don't even know what the scientific outcome. They did tell us that they consider it good science, but we don't really know what their outcome of that decision. However, we are going to be dumping a fair bit of new data on them shortly, so it's going to probably keep coming for the next 2 to 3 years, so it's going to keep them busy for a while. But certainly from the industry perspective, it's very important that we base any arguments about changes in this space, the APVMA, around science-based data, and so they can make science-based decisions. We're certainly, anecdotal information isn't going to get us over the line just in terms of lack of risk to industry and perceived no risk to the environment. So PHA have really had an instrumental role, particularly Nicholas Woods, in supporting the working party in this space, and we actually are working through the process of whether we can develop a more sophisticated model. And PHA has actually had a lot of consultation with a wide range of national and international stakeholders in space. There are a lot of there's a lot of other research going on internationally, and we need to tap into that. The Spray Drift Task Force model cost about $28 million US about 15 years ago to develop. Best estimates around something like 50 or 60 million US again to develop today. So we certainly need to tap into the existing resource in that space. And currently we have a draft response plan that the working party has actually reviewed, and we've now put that out for public consultation with the key industry stakeholders such as Cotton Australia, Grain Producers Australia, and we'll actually be having a meeting in Canberra the week of the 18th of April to the wider National Working Party group. And so if you're interested in that, please ask myself or Gavin Catnar for details on that. But that's going to be part of this consultation process, and hopefully at the end of that process we'll have consensus about how we go forward. But some of the research focus will be is that we'll probably need to do some additional wind tunnel testing to look at new spray technologies, core spray technologies, use of new adjuvant technologies, and formulation types to actually reduce the drift potential of spray technologies. We will be tapping into some other work that's going on. There's an ARC linkage grant with Queensland University of Technology, and there's quite a bit of activity in horticulture going on in New Zealand at the moment as well in this space. Horticulture actually is going to be technically a much more difficult area, I think, to deal with than just grains, because it's hard to move vines and trees away from households and things like that. So just to give you a bit of a map in terms of where we might be heading, and this is the consensus view of the working party in terms of the appropriate direction. We've already done this part. We've actually done some existing analysis of international data. There is some potential new investment that's being considered to support the generation of a Canadian empirical ground model that we can potentially tap into. The 4As actually have quite an effective aerial droplet calculator already here in Australia for aerial application as well. This big piece of work over here has been developed in New Zealand, particularly in the horticulture area, or that's the main focus of their activity, and there is actually potential to link these two together to create a fully predictive ground model that basically, that for a whole range of scenarios that we can look to see how various approaches such as either application type or formulation can affect ultimately spray drift. What we're currently looking at is a heap of ancillary projects to support this in terms of coordination roles, also development of new DRT nozzle data size calculators that will be useful for the grains industry. And there's potential from the outcome of this to actually develop models that actually work in reverse. So if you're a grower and I say, I want to fibre a 10-metre buffer zone, what do I actually have to do to achieve that? And what are the most cost-effective options? So out of this process, there is opportunity to look at doing, developing a model that actually works in reverse. And really, this looks like quite a complex equation and involves a lot of international parties, but we really want to get this point of developing a fully predictive ground model. So the outcomes of this process is hopefully we will come to consensus about how we'll approach this, and we hope to get work actually underway in the next few months. So we're wanting to move very rapidly on this, building on the existing work we've done to date. We are certainly going to need to do new wind tunnel deposition curve work, and that's going to have to occur. And there is opportunity to develop new and accurate appropriate spray drift assessment models and assist the APVMA in consideration of those. So where we are currently is looking at how we can actually explore linkage either with the international work or with the potential investors in this space, and that's the major point of discussion at this time. And most importantly, we do need a transparent science-based understanding of these models and methods and how the regulator actually uses that for our assessments. We actually need to understand how the regulator is actually making their decisions so we can make rational decisions about work going forward. It's very important that not only we use a transparent process, but we're going to need to understand how the regulator is operating in that space. And so having a robust model assists us with that. And we will be looking at a whole range of new DRTs. There's certainly opportunity for a range of new ones. And in terms of plant industries, there's opportunity to consider some other areas, including the enhanced stewardship by appropriate new technologies, and actually helping that to drive the DRT adoption program. There are going to be some drivers for manufacturers in this space because there's going to be a need for them probably to meet some sort of recognised standards so that their products can actually be understood and utilised within the APVMA context of spray drift control. And there is a need to fine-tune some of our sort of short-term research methodologies as well in terms of how we might look at some new DRTs. There's a considerable amount of ongoing liaison and communication with the APVMA, particularly Nicholas Woods is facilitating that on behalf of the working party, although each of the registering companies are obviously doing their own as well, and even GRDC, we're having dialogue individually, but principally most of that is being channelled in a formal sense through the APVMA, through Nicholas Woods. And we hope to develop an effective stakeholder investment model, and that's going to be the pointy end of this equation. So next steps, we've got the draft response plan out for consultation with stakeholders, with peak industry groups, and we'll get feedback and we'll have a meeting in April to discuss that. And we've just got to finalise the negotiation how we go forward doing the further work in this space. So in summary, I suppose we are in a situation where we're going to have to change what we do, and if you're an advisor, you're going to be in a position where you're going to have to understand how those regulations are going to affect your advice to growers, and also how that's going to impact in terms of the efficacy of the products. It's going to create some challenges. Potentially some products are perhaps not as effective, particularly if you look at fungicides, at core spray qualities. You know, that's an area that's we probably need to consider more work in that space, and that creates some challenges. But there will be new label instructions and mandatory no spray zones coming on a range of products, and look, we wait and see what the APVMA does in this regard, but we're hoping that they'll take into account consideration a lot of the work that's been done. You know, certainly the work we've seen today on AI nozzles, you can easily chop the buffer zones back to a third of what they're saying. If you put a shroud over it, you can reduce it to very negligible levels of buffer zones. That's what the data suggests at the moment. But are we going to end up with a zero buffer zone, which is what a lot of people are talking to me? I'm not sure we're going to end up at that point. But there's certainly, over the next few years, the APVMA have indicated there's going to be quite a comprehensive review of all current labels in this space. So I suppose really from GRC's point of view, we're just looking at how we're going to invest in this process, and I'm grateful to the working party for supporting the grains industry and GRC in this process as well. Just to finish with, we have got an investment, particularly focusing around development of this ground-based DRT risk model. That's probably one of the primary objectives of where GRC wants to see its investment go, support of new technologies, and really to sort of broaden the number of DRTs proven to be valuable to growers. One of the key things we have to do is look at economic models to look at least cost alternative to these DRTs. That's going to be a big challenge for the industry. How's going to be the cheapest way to approach this? And clearly identify the economic value proposition of growers actually changing their spray equipment and technology. Just to let you know that the GRC is investing about $1 million in this whole process to date as a start in this area, and we are looking as the co-investment from the other participants in this process to support this, but it is certainly probably one of the most complex things I've ever been involved in this space. I'm now spending a day and a half a week on regulatory issues, which I'd rather be spending on research. It'd be much easier, but that's just the way of the world that we are in at the moment. But perhaps I'll open up the questions if there's any. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Rohan.
Hello, Rohan. Colin Butcher.
Yeah, thanks, Colin.
You know me.
Well.
I'm also the chair of ChemCert WA. I noticed through your presentation there was one line about training. I've noticed very little comment about that. It seems to me from the presentation that there's an area that says if we research, we register and we regulate, then it's all going to be implemented. My concern is that 99% of the problem with drift is because of poor application methodology by farmers. So where does training fit into the discussion that you're having at the National Working Party level?
Yeah, the broader, thanks Colin, it's a really good question. The broader issue of stewardship, if we're going to describe as that area, is a really important one, and I suppose, you know, with a change in regulations in that space is going to have to require to some degree a change in the mindset of growers in that space. So the need to providing training in that space is quite real. I think that's been a point of major discussion. Certainly in the working parties looking at this area of stewardship very carefully and clearly. One of the challenges, you've got to create a clear value proposition for growers too to actually change their practices, and that's one of the key focuses of the work that we're doing, is to ensure that proposition is very clear and real, so that growers can clearly see there's going to be an economic benefit to their business operations. Not only are they just going to have to comply with these new regulations. So many of the participants in the broader working party group have been involved in ChemCert training nationally, and they've certainly been engaged in the previous two meetings, and we fully expect that they've been invited already to this meeting. And you know, perhaps in your role in Western Australia you might want to be engaged in that yourself, but it's certainly an important part of that whole process in terms of communication, training, stewardship in terms of pesticide application.
I guess the perfect outcome is a software package which encompasses the chemicals, has the ability for the applicator to put the information on the day, in on a day and get a recommended outcome as to buffer zones or whether he should even be spraying. There's another aspect of spraying which I think generally growers haven't encompassed that well, and that's the record keeping. And I guess the ideal outcome from my point of view would be one software package that encompasses all of that. And I'm just wondering, is that where you're aiming to go? And if so, how long will before that's available, I guess, for producers to have that in the cab of the tractor on a laptop?
It's a good question. That, in fact, it's interesting. If you look at QA requirements, they actually do vary significantly state by state across the country. Some states have mandatory record-keeping requirements already, and so that is a definite requirement to undertake that. The easier or more seamless that the record-keeping process, the easier it is to adopt QA practices, I think, in terms of meeting those obligations to record what you've done. And look, I've individually had discussions with PA companies that develop controllers and control systems for spray units, and everyone's very interested in this space. The challenge is, of course, is that you have many competing interests in that space, and to actually have a QA system that is universally accepted and adopted is going to, it's a bit of a challenge, like the Isobus work, to try and get all those companies to agree to a platform is difficult. But certainly going to need to record information. Not only that, probably the more important area is actually recording of the weather data as you've actually sprayed during that operation, and perhaps what inversion risks might have been occurring during that operation. I think that in terms of record keeping, it's not just what you've done, but the weather conditions at that point in time are going to be vitally important, and also to demonstrate that you've actually checked those. And the label changes, as we understand it, will actually require you to check, and you'll have to be able to provide some demonstration of that. So, I think it's a significant opportunity for the companies in this space to look closely at that area.
Rohan, would you care to mention to the group that GRDC is looking at predictive models on, or improved predictive models on, inversion probability?
Yeah, actually Ralph's the expert on this, so we could just about leave the microphone with him. Ralph's been quite instrumental in assisting us through discussions, but we're well aware that there's going to be some label requirements around particularly inversion management for growers and just understanding the optimal conditions to spraying. And we are currently making some investments in that space to try and work through the process of how that we can look at inversion risk. There is a number of systems already up online, like New Farm have the Spraywise Decisions, and Syngenta have their programs as well that support growers in terms of some of those weather management objectives. But as part of this equation, I think the first priority has certainly been looking at spray drift modelling, but with part of that certainly the climatic impacts and modelling around inversion management is going to be a key part of that. So Ralph has been and will continue to be supporting us in this space because there's significant knowledge in this space, particularly from his experience with aircraft-based applications.
Is the buffer area going to be dependent upon whether the sprayed paddock is internal to the farm or at its boundaries? I mean, you could conceivably have a wider buffer if the adjoining paddock is your own, whereas if it's a neighbour's, it's a little bit tighter. Is that taken into account?
Yes and no. The label refers to sensitive areas. So if you've got native veg or waterways, they come under this label legislation. So even if they're on your property, you're still going to have to deal with the legislation around that. Within your own property, so how you manage those other aspects, I suppose, up to the individual grower, how they want to manage it. But just in a sort of a label sense, my understanding is that it will refer to sensitive areas, and it's how each state, I suppose, chooses to interpret and enforce those is going to create a bit of some challenges for us. Actually, just while I think of it, Mike, too, you've reminded me, one of the challenges we also have is that a lot of the research that we've done to date, say in our research programs, generally have been perhaps used with a medium coarse nozzle. One of the discussions we're having is the type of spray qualities we actually need for any ongoing efficacy work that we do. And so one of the questions we're actually asking in the research programs is they have to have capacity to run AI nozzles and high pressure spray systems, because there's no point doing more work using the nozzle technology that the growers can't actually use in the regulatory sense. So That's one of the things that this working party is going to have to discuss, is provide, I'm going to seek recommendations from this group myself in terms of advice we'll provide to research providers in terms of what sort of spray qualities we should be using for ongoing work in this space.
Rohan, you might like to comment, where is Australia at in terms of this drift management, in terms of other countries around the world? Are we behind and catching up and they're a lot further ahead and the regulations are a lot stricter?
That's a good question, actually. In Europe, as you can imagine, they've been more highly regulated in the space for some time. They've actually, as a consequence, invested heavily in drift reduction modelling, and they've actually got some really great models for Europe. The difficulty, if you talk to David Nugent and some of the other people who've done that work, they say they don't really relate well to Australia because the water rates, the operation speeds, the boom heights, the whole range of things that they actually operate under are quite different. Like, they're like, 200 to 400 litres a hectare of water and 6 kilometres an hour, whereas we're using 40 litres a hectare of water and I don't know, whatever, 30, 40 k's an hour, whatever people can do. So that's been a challenge. Compared to the US, we probably are being more highly regulated in this space. That's been one of the things that we've generally taken the lead, I suppose, from the US in terms of modelling in this space. And so for some reason, the government in Australia has chosen to leapfrog us ahead, so that's created some new challenges to us. Are the US EPA looking at this space currently? Yep, they're currently reviewing exactly what APVMA are doing. So whether that'll actually drive some further investment in the US in this space is yet to be determined. But that does create some challenges for us. And, our use patterns are different. Our regulations are different to the other countries in that they're probably potentially going to be more restrictive than the US at this point. So that's actually meant that we've actually had to make investment that is, I suppose, at the leading edge of this area. Is there interest from Canada and the US in co-investing in this area? Absolutely, and that's why a key part of this is working through those processes, how we can actually do that jointly.